We welcome our next guest in on the Gallo Radio Show. Lucien Smith, kind enough to get up with us this morning. Good morning, my friend.
Morning, Richard. How you doing?
I feel like it's kind of been like individually getting the band back together. So last year, a year ago, right about this time, we did the coverage on election night.
Right.
And visited with Henry last week and visited with Sid earlier this week. And glad to get to spend some time with you today as well. Let's start with swing states. Pennsylvania, win. Michigan still waiting. Wisconsin still waiting. Georgia, win. Arizona still waiting. Nevada still waiting. North Carolina, win. Even in those where we're still waiting, the expectation is Donald Trump is going to clean sweep those 7 swing states. How did it happen?
It's extraordinary. I mean, it's extraordinary because it's just so inconsistent with the narrative that I think we were getting sold, right? I mean, this was supposed to be a close election. I think a lot of people, myself included, 4 years ago, I think I stayed up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning watching the results come in, wanting to see who was going to be the eventual winner. At about 10:30 last night, I said, well, we're not going to know. I'm going to go to bed, and kind of wish I'd stayed up to watch all of it. It's really just extraordinary.
I couldn't make myself stay up that late. I fell asleep 2 different times watching election returns. First in the bed, then I got out of the bed and sat in a chair and fell asleep in the chair. I was like, okay, I'm not going to make it. I made it till about 12:30 or so. It would take another hour and a half before we kind of got the announcement. But it felt like it was trending in that direction.
Agreed.
Because the margins were so big.
Yeah, the first great sign to me was when the exit polling started coming out. Politico released an exit poll out of Georgia that said the majority, it was about 56% of voters who voted in Georgia said the economy was their number one issue. Mm-hmm. Well, if the economy is your number one issue, and you've got the issues that we've got in the economy right now, that's going to be bad for incumbents. And Kamala Harris attempted, with the media's help, to run a new version of the Biden 2020 campaign. They wanted to make this a referendum on Donald Trump, but they were just unsuccessful. I mean, the fact of the matter is you can't run as a change candidate when you're the sitting vice president of the United States and have been there for the last 4 years. And it honestly is political malpractice in my mind that they thought they could run a campaign like that. To hear her say, we're going to turn the page. Well, you're living at the Naval Observatory. You're the vice president. Yeah, let's turn the page by electing somebody else. And I think that's what happened yesterday.
Madam Vice President, you are the page.
Yeah, exactly.
You are the page that you're talking about turning. I talked about this a little bit before the break. I thought there were a couple of things. Obviously, the Democrats had more money than the Republicans had, and so there was a little bit different strategy that was used this time by the Republican campaign, by the Trump campaign, and this had been in the works for a long time with the strategy. So a couple of things. One, I thought Donald Trump ran the most disciplined campaign that he has run by a long shot.
Absolutely. Doing
it for the third time. Not that he didn't wander, because he's a wanderer, but largely he stayed on message.
He did, and that is a change from the past. And I started to get nervous last week when you started to see him. You know, when things looked like they were really trending in our direction, I think a concern a lot of us had was that the Republicans were getting overconfident, that he might have peaked too soon. We were starting to celebrate before the election. And I think you saw that a little bit in him going back to old ways of saying things that got a great reaction from the crowd, but could easily get twisted by the media in a negative way. So that was a real concern. But you're right; he ran a very different campaign and was able to control his impulses on what he said in a way that you're right. I don't think we saw in 2020 or 16.
And in the final 2 weeks, the only real trip over his own feet, and it wasn't his doing. It was with the MSG rally with Tony Hinchcliffe and the spot. And then within 48 hours, the sitting president bailed him out in a way that nobody could have seen coming with his own comments.
Yeah, I mean, it was Biden calling the supporters garbage reminds you a lot of Hillary Clinton calling them deplorables back in 2016, and I think it riled people up and changed, to your point, changed the subject.
And then not only did it turn the attention to Biden and what he said, the Trump campaign did a great job in terms of capitalizing from a marketing standpoint with
Absolutely.
the garbage truck and with him going to the rally wearing the reflective vest. And I guess I'll use that as a transition point. Another thing that Trump did, and part of this was because of a lack of money, but part of it was appealing to Generation Z And somebody on our text line a few minutes ago pointed out that Barron Trump actually probably should get some credit for this, for encouraging his dad to go do some of these long-form podcasts. Theo Von, Joe Rogan, Bussin' with the Boys, The Undertaker. No presidential candidate has ever sat down for 2 to 3 hour long-form interviews during a campaign 2-3 weeks from Election Day.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it speaks to a broader change in the way people consume news. I think that's one of the reasons that, and I've talked about this before, it's one of the reasons I think the media hates Trump. It's one of the reasons that the media hates Elon Musk is because they're supposed to be the gatekeepers, right? The people who tell you what's a fact are supposed to be the people who are on NBC News or ABC News. And you're not supposed to be able to go through these alternative channels and get things out to people. And technology has just revolutionized that. And you're right, he made a tremendous use of it. But to a certain extent, he had to make a different use of it because you saw over and over and over again just a stunning amount of dishonesty from the mainstream media. I mean, the best example to me, or one of the best examples, was the Liz Cheney stuff, right? I mean, you saw the mainstream media say, Donald Trump said we should put Liz Cheney in front of a firing squad. And knowing the way Trump talks, especially as he gets fired up in public settings, I saw that headline and said, oh, gosh, what a terrible thing to say.
Like, yeah, what did he say?
And then out of curiosity, I did what most people wouldn't have done if they're not in the business of talking about this sort of thing. I actually went and pulled the video up and listened to him talk, which I know you did and other people did as well. But your average guy is just going to see the headline where he said, let's put Liz Cheney in front of a firing squad and think that's awful. And so I think these alternative channels are important because he's able to get out there and get his message out and not have somebody lie about what he said, which is what a lot of the media was trying to do.
You're going to have to forgive me because I don't know the name of this phenomenon, or I can't call it right now. But there is, I guess it's a psychological practice that is used when I am doing something, usually something wrong, and my defense is, you're doing this thing that I am actually doing. I don't know what I mean, J.D. Vance described it as, the way a 2-year-old tells a lie. He said, he said, J.D. Vance in one of these long-form interviews said, I'm a baker. I like to bake. And my 2-year-old son and I were making an Oreo cake. And I stepped away for just a second and I came back and clearly he had eaten like half a dozen Oreos. And I was like, buddy, did you eat the Oreos? And he looked at me and he goes, no, you ate the Oreos, Dad. and so that's what, but that's what happened. It's like they are accusing Trump of, you're lying about this, you're distorting the truth, you're not doing this. And then they take these sound bites like you're talking about, whether it's Liz Cheney or the Very Fine Men hoax, and, the list goes on. And former President Barack Obama is standing on stage at rallies using these talking points over and over and over.
That's right. I mean, I think generally if you see the Democrats accusing the Republicans of something, it's probably because they're doing it. And an example going back to 2016 is this accusation that Trump and his family were profiting off of him being in the White House. Now, I've never seen that substantiated. I think the closest they come to it is saying he owned a hotel in Washington that sometimes foreign dignitaries would stay in, so somehow paying...
Which he sold.
Which he sold now. He no longer has that. But they said, oh, gosh, look, they're using his position in power, his position as president, to profit. Well, what the heck was Hunter Biden doing when he's getting paid $50,000 a month in a field he knows nothing about while his father is president of the United States and meeting the people who are paying him? Sounds like to me he was profiting off his dad being in power.
You play golf, right?
Not well, but yes.
I think one of the great questions in all of this is, does this mean that we can get the Open Championship back at Turnberry someday? One of the great golf courses in the world?
That's a very good question. I doubt it, but that's a good question.
We got more coming up with Lucien Smith, former chairman of the Mississippi Republican Party, joining us in studio this morning. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. We will turn our attention to Mississippi when we come back because there are some really interesting potential ripple effects coming from yesterday's election. We're back with you after this on the Gallo Show. Back with you on the Gallo Radio Show on this Wednesday morning, the 6th of November. Thank you for being with us. Just to give you some numbers to back up the whole podcast conversation from a second ago. Impulsive with Logan Paul back on June 13th, 6.6 million views on YouTube. The All In podcast, 3.4 million. Aiden Ross's live stream did 2.5 million. This past weekend with Theo Vaughn, 14 million. That was on August 20th. The Sean Ryan Show did 3.5 million. The Lex Friedman podcast, 5.1 million. Flagrant did 7 million views. The Full Send podcast, 3.2. There was a Barstool podcast, Bussin' with the Boys, 420,000, hit a younger demographic. The PBD podcast, 2.7 million. Dan Bongino's show, 2.8 million. 1.1 million for Maintaining with Tyra, 6 Feet Under with The Undertaker, 708,000. And then the Joe Rogan Experience, 37.8 million views or listens. And that was a week ago, so those numbers have probably gone up since then. Well, it really is staggering, the audience sizes.
Absolutely. That's what I was about to say. It's so much larger, as I understand it, than what you get on the primetime cable news shows. I mean, more people are listening to All In than are watching any of MSNBC or even Fox News's evening programming, as I understand it. If I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will let us know that on the C Spire text line. But it's amazing the reach that they have, especially because to have a podcast, all you have to have is a phone or a computer. I mean, you don't have to go get hired by a legacy media company and work your way up to being on, the Fox evening programming or the MSNBC evening program. You just have to have good quality content that people want to listen to, and boom, you've got a national platform potentially.
And one of the interesting things about Joe Rogan is that's been built organically. I mean, he's been doing this for well over a decade, and his audience is ridiculously loyal.
Yeah. And I think part of that's because he's honest, right? Like he just talks. They just have a conversation. It's not performative. It's not telling you what you want to hear, which now so much of evening cable news has just turned into rage porn, right? It's you want to turn on the television and be told how fantastic you are and how evil the other guys are. You can do it any time of day just by putting it on. And Rogan, I mean, he's not a conservative. He's not somebody who's got specific political views that I necessarily agree with. He's just telling the truth, and I think you're right. It makes it compelling listening.
Lucien Smith.
The Logan Paul one I thought was extremely well done. I don't mean to interrupt, but
no. Yeah.
From the younger generation, a guy that has been doing this and his brother for a long time, genuinely put out an amazing argument of why you should vote for Trump. And I think those types of things help when you really do kind of circle around and say, okay, the young voters are very important, and we can reach them. How do we do that?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right.
I think they did a much better job this go around.
Yeah, there's no question about it. It was a very effective strategy. Lucien Smith visiting with us, former chairman of the Republican Party here in the state of Mississippi. Historically, our state has benefited from senior-level senators from our state in positions of power. There's been a lot of good that has come from that. Now, there are people that want to point to that as pork projects or whatever. I mean, the system is what it is. Roger Wicker, as chair of the Armed Services Committee, now that Republicans have the control of the Senate, what do you think it means practically for Mississippi, especially when it comes to Ingalls on the coast, military bases, et cetera?
It is huge. It's one of many reasons that people were right to vote overwhelmingly for Roger Wicker. And I think you look at Roger's numbers, he got over 63% of the vote yesterday. I mean, he that is a dominant win. Those are Phil Bryant 2015 kind of numbers on getting reelected. And he ran against an actual candidate who had a little bit of money, who went out and ran a real race. And it speaks to his popularity.
I mentioned this yesterday when I was talking with Mike Hurst. I think Ty Pinkins deserves some credit. He worked really, really hard, and I thought he ran a good race with a massive challenge.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, there was no world in which he was going to win, just because Mississippi's not going to elect a Democrat. But you're right. I mean, he ran a real race. He was working hard. It didn't feel like one of those, hey, I just think it's going to be neat to see my name on the ballot kind of candidates that you get from time to time.
Yeah.
But no, Roger deserves a lot of credit also for running a very disciplined, good race. He worked hard. I mean, last night, I think before polls closed, they were over in Rankin County handing out yard signs, going door to door. I mean, doing real work that'd be easy as a senior senator to just kind of say, well, I've got this in the bag. Mississippi's going to vote for me.
Sure.
Let's go to the suite and wait for the results to come in. He did a very good job. But
didn't take anything for granted.
No, that's right. But to your question, it's massive for Mississippi. I mean, whether you want to talk about Ingalls on the coast, the military bases that we have around the state, having him as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee is going to be helpful for all of those. It's going to be an economic driver for Mississippi as he's able to protect what we have and hopefully get more here, but it's also going to be good beyond what it does for Mississippi.
I was about to say the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, Roger has been very, very clear about the need to have a Navy that's large enough, that's well enough equipped. That is a problem that we've got because the time it takes us to generate new boats is much slower than it's taking the Chinese. They're attempting to challenge our naval supremacy, and so the country is safer because Roger Wicker is going to be the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. So I think it's a great thing for Mississippi economically, and I think it's a great thing for the entire country.
Visiting with Lucien Smith. All right, here's the bomb that I'm going to drop in your lap and see if I can get you to talk about this a little bit. So there is a ripple effect potentially here in Mississippi. There are those who are connected politically that think that there is a very real chance that Cindy Hyde-Smith is appointed Commissioner of Agriculture. Do you have any insight on that? Do you think that happens? Does it make sense?
I think it certainly makes sense in the sense that in a couple different ways. I think she would be good in that role. I mean, she was a former agriculture commissioner. Her family is in the beef cattle business, so she's got some real expertise when it comes to agriculture. She's got 6 years now in the U.S. Senate, and so she's got familiarity with how Washington works, and she's got a great relationship with Donald Trump. So I think that is certainly not an unreasonable expectation. I'll tell you the other thing is Phil Bryant appointed her. Phil Bryant's incredibly close to Donald Trump, and I am confident that the former governor will be. This is pure supposition. This isn't something Governor Bryant's said to me, but I am very confident he will be promoting her to Donald Trump as Trump tries to think how that cabinet looks. So, yes, I think that's very, very reasonable that she could end up there.
All right, so the next step of our hypothetical here is that leaves an open Senate seat in Mississippi in which Governor Tate Reeves would make an appointment.
That's right.
And there are a lot of names that you could throw out. Mississippi is fortunate to have a very strong roster right now, and relatively young roster in the Republican Party. A lot of different directions that you could go, but there is also the scenario where, in theory, Tate Reeves could appoint himself to that Senate seat. There would be pushback from that, but he wouldn't do it without encouragement from people whose opinions really matter.
That's right.
Is there a scenario where that happens?
So I think it's unlikely that the governor would appoint himself to the Senate. You're right, he has the authority to do that, but I think you're right, it would feel like self-dealing. What would strike me as a more likely scenario, first of all, I have no idea if Tate Reeves wants to be a U.S. Senator or wants to be a U.S. Senator right now, but the way this works, is if I recall correctly, is when we're not in a statewide election year, and next year would not be a statewide election year, there are 90 days from the appointment to when the special election has to take place. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will hit us up at 601-879-4395 on the C Spire text line to correct me.
Said by a man who has filled in on this show and hosted it as well. Thank you. 601-879-4395.
But it's a short election. It's not going to be a long election. So there's a massive advantage for somebody with a lot of name ID. He can't really appoint somebody obscure and expect them to win. So I think if the governor did say, hey, I want to be a U.S. Senator, I want to take Cindy's place, the thing to do would be to appoint a caretaker senator, somebody who announced on the front end they did not plan to run. They just were going to serve in that seat until the people chose, and then simultaneously announce that you were running for it, which I think would engender a lot of goodwill that you had this opportunity to just give it to yourself and said, no, the people should decide. But two, Tate Reeves has the highest name ID of any politician in the state of Mississippi. So he would begin that race with an absolutely massive advantage. And as a result of that, I think you wouldn't see a lot of people jump in against him. That I think would be the approach if that's where he wanted to be.
And then that would open the governor's slot.
And if he were to win, the lieutenant governor, Delbert Hosemann, would immediately become governor. And then there's a question, and I remember we researched it years and years ago. It's not 100% clear if the governor appoints a new lieutenant governor or if the president pro tem of the Senate simply serves as president of the Senate until the next lieutenant governor's election. But if we head that way, I suspect we will find out possibly when some court answers that question in litigation.
You got time to hang for just a few more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lucien Smith, former chairman of the Mississippi Republican Party, joining us in studio. This is the Gallo Radio Show on the 6th of November. Donald Trump, a winner last night. You know, there's a phenomenon in the sports world in delighting in others' misery. If you play a rival and you beat your rival, you're really intrigued to listen to their post-game radio show, their call-in show, to go and read their message board.
I listened to MSNBC this morning.
I have the TV in the office on MSNBC right now, and I'm just saying, I think this same phenomenon carries over to politics.
A little schadenfreude?
Exactly.
There's always a healthy level of that.
I remember 8 years ago, I had dinner with some good friends on election night, and we had the TV on in the background, but all of us showed up knowing that Donald Trump was going to lose. It was going to be a bad night for the Republicans. And over the course of the night, as returns started to come in, we thought, now this may be about to turn out differently than we expected. And you got more and more excited. And eventually we started switching it between CNN and MSNBC because, frankly, it was just fun to watch Wolf Blitzer have to announce some of these states were going for Donald Trump. So, yes, I think it's probably not the healthiest phenomenon, but I do think it's pretty natural.
Retired? I didn't see him last night.
I didn't either. He may have. That's a good question.
Not as of about a week or two, maybe a few weeks ago, he was still out and about, but he's very obscure.
Minimalized than he used to.
Jake Tapper has pushed him into a closet somewhere at CNN headquarters. It's kind of taken over.
I guess that's right. Tapper's kind of the elder statesman now. He was wearing a three-piece suit last night.
He was, which is, I guess if you can pull it off, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure many people can pull it off.
I don't even try.
Yeah.
Lucien, to me, the interesting part of the conversation, we're going to have to wait for the results on the House. It feels like Republicans are going to maintain control in the House, but we're not there yet, and that's actually the part of this whole process where we may have to wait a few days to figure out where this finishes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's going to take us a few days to know who wins the House. The early indications certainly look like the Republicans are probably going to pick up a few seats. The toss-ups and the lean Republican seats mostly broke Republican. The lean Democrat seats have so far seemed to be splitting. So I think the Republicans are in a good position there, but it's going to take us a few days. And I'll say, we've got one of the things that we ought to do as a country between now and 2028 is update the laws on how we count absentee and early votes in a way that protects election integrity. Because right now, we should not be having to wait days to find out who won the election. You shouldn't start counting once the election's over. That's right. And those laws didn't really matter 20 years ago when it was a tiny portion of the electorate that didn't vote on Election Day. It was fine if we had to wait a week to figure out if Roger Wicker won with 64 or 64.2% of the vote. You still know who won. But now that you've got huge swaths that don't actually vote on Election Day, those antiquated laws just don't make sense. I don't know what the right system is, but it's not what we got in a bunch of these states.
I mentioned it earlier. I think there's a lot of credit that should be handed down in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan because it was a disaster 4 years ago.
Absolutely.
And you can believe whatever you want to believe about the results of that election, whether or not it was stolen, whether it was cheated. Believe whatever you want to believe. I'm not trying to change your mind one way or the other. But the system was not good.
That's right.
All four of those states were much, much better yesterday in terms of efficiency, the way they went about it, integrity, like all of the things that should matter in an election.
Yeah, you were 100% right there. I mean, it frankly reminds you a little bit of Florida, which was a disaster in 2000, and then they got their stuff together, and now they're kind of a model for how states ought to run elections. So I hope we will continue to trend in that direction because it is an opportunity for fraud, whether or not you think the 2020 election was fraudulent or not. And even if there's not fraud occurring, when you sit there for a week or more trying to figure out who actually got more votes, it is an invitation for people to say there's fraud, which is honestly almost as big of a problem as there actually being fraud because it undermines faith in elections.
So I think where I was going with this, we know about the White House, we know about the Senate, we think we know about the popular vote, how that's going to turn out, and we got to wait on the House, but it feels like it's going to end in Republican control, which is where it was. prior to the election. Then you turn your attention to governing.
Right.
And we have seen Republicans with across-the-board majority and the White House when they didn't get a whole lot done. They spent more time fighting with themselves about, no, it should be this, no, it should be this. Can, under Donald Trump's leadership, Republicans with control of both houses of Congress get some meaningful stuff done in the next 2 years? But because you can say 4 years, but really you got 2 before your next round of congressional elections that you don't know how they're going to turn out.
That's right. And I think the Senate map 2 years from now is much more difficult for us. So there is a possibility we won't control the Senate after 2 years. And historically, presidents in their first term, I know Donald Trump's going into his second, but presidents in their first term lose significantly in the midterm election. So we probably will face, hopefully Republicans are still in charge, but a different composition in the House and Senate after the midterm election. So you're right. We've got to do it in the next 2 years. I think the answer is yes. I think 8 years ago when Donald Trump was elected, he was at the beginning of this transformation in the party. I mean, he was pushing a very populist agenda that didn't have the support of a lot of the rank and file, or at least the leadership in the House. And I think now this transition has happened. I mean, people recognize, whether they like it or not, that the Republican Party is a much more populist party. He's going to have a populist agenda. I think the House members will recognize that if they get a majority in the House, it is in large part because Donald Trump propelled them to a House victory, whereas 8 years ago I think they thought they won in spite of Donald Trump. So, yes, I think there's a real possibility. Now, one thing that we're terrible at in the Republican Party is following through on fiscal discipline when we're in charge. We are absolutely fantastic at criticizing the Democrats when they overspend, but then we have a tendency to get the checkbook ourselves and start spending on our priorities and overspending. And that, I think, Richard, is going to be, it's a national security issue where our debt is, and that I think is going to be one of the biggest challenges the next 2 years is figuring out, can we get our fiscal house in order now that we've got control? Because we do own it all. It's on us.
And, Lucien, there are only 2 ways to do that, right? You can either pay down the debt and spend less or make more.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Figure out how to make more. I mean, Donald Trump says tariffs, whatever, but I'm not sure that you can generate $36 trillion in tariffs.
You certainly can't do it in a way that it wouldn't be just devastating to the economy. And I think the tariff fight is going to be interesting because I think even the Republican leaders in the House and the Senate are going to view a return to 19th century style tariffs as something that is probably not in the economic best interest of the country and probably would have an inflationary effect. So I think that is going to there's going to be some significant fighting over that. But, the Trump tax cuts are set to expire, so I think this win probably means that those will become permanent. But yes, I hope we see massive reform coming out of this administration, coming out of Congress.
Whether you like Donald Trump, you voted for him but had to hold your nose, you love Donald Trump, or you hate the guy. I'm curious if this is the biggest political comeback story of all time.
Tough to think of one in recent times that has been this large. I mean,
because it's not just Grover Cleveland being voted out of office and coming back and winning.
Right.
It's being voted out by the people, claiming that the election was stolen, being indicted, having your life assassination attempts multiple times, being sued, being tarred and feathered, pilloried, the all of it, and then you come back and win, and not just win, but win convincingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's a tribute to Trump's resilience and the excitement that he's been able to generate with his base. It also speaks to the extremism in the Democratic Party. I mean, they've gotten so far to the left that they just don't appeal to huge numbers of Americans, and it's disappointing. I think the thing I am most interested to see is what does the vice president say today when she speaks and presumably concedes this election? What happens in Congress with certifying the election? Because I think there's going to be some people, there are already some Democrats who are wanting to make election denialism great again and go back to delegitimizing the lawfully elected president. There have been some House members who said they shouldn't certify him. And so I'll be interested to see what happens there. But they're already trying to explain it, just like they did in 2016. There's zero introspection on their policy positions. This is getting explained as sexism, even though she only had an 8-point advantage among women. It's being explained as racism, even though Donald Trump essentially doubled his share of black male voters in this election. He won Hispanics in some states. There is very little desire in the Democratic Party to say maybe people don't want boys in the girls' bathroom. Maybe they don't want weaponized Title IX to force boys into girls' sports. Maybe they don't want a massive open border people pour through all the time. No, they're going to come up with a bunch of explanations, but none of them have anything to do with policy.
I think Jack Smith's dusting off his resume this morning.
I think there are a lot of people in Washington right now who need to be doing that for just the reason he's coming in. He's going to clean house.
Lucien, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks as always for the insight. Look forward to catching up soon.
Great to see you, Richard. Thank you.
Lucien Smith, former chairman of the Mississippi GOP. Really good insight on last night's results, future for Mississippi, and a whole lot more. We have come almost to the end of our time. We'll wrap things up with you when we come back. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi.